Next up, we have a developer who works as an evangelist at a company called Pusher. He has 8 years of experience in software development, and he loves emojis. So give it up for Zan Markan.
Hi. Oh, this is loud. I need to do this first. Yeah, it's great to be here in Oslo. My name is Anne, and as it was said, I do like emoji. I'm really excited to be in Oslo because I get to see this guy in the flesh or in the oil, however you want to call it. Anyway, yeah, I work at Pusher. We make real-time APIs that power a bunch of apps in a bunch of industries, from news, ride-sharing, deliveries, messaging, communication, all of that. Anything that makes the apps move and doesn't require a page refresh or things like that, makes more dynamic, we can power it basically. I'm super excited actually because today we're launching a new product out of beta. It's called ChatKit, and it's a messaging API. Super versatile. You pick and choose what you want, and we don't force features onto you. You can talk to me afterwards if you want to know more. But yeah, let's talk about the topic at hand: push notifications. Yeah, most of you might be familiar with something like that. If you're frequent flyers with low-cost airlines, they often send stuff like that. Basically, hey, we have a sale. You can get discounted tickets, super cheap. There's hundreds of thousands of seats available. Just book now and save a bunch of money. There's a couple of problems with this. First off, how many of you are likely to actually click on this? I don't think it's very many. Secondly, it's actually against the guidelines that the platforms have for advertisement, because notifications are not an advertisement channel. And yeah, as you can imagine, there is usually a bunch of negative effects that you can see on social media. This is actually from my friend Luca, who's complaining about it, and a lot of people do the same. Because let's face it, most notifications are annoying, and yeah, it's airlines are not the only ones. There's games. If you play games, then you've seen chests or loot boxes or reward boxes or whatever you want to call them. They unlock every couple of hours. They unlock every day, every week. Doesn't matter. And the best way to tell the people what's going on is obviously to send them a push. Hey, come back to the app. We have something shiny for you. Ooh, shiny. Yeah, games are probably like one of the worst offenders, but they're not the only ones. I mean, there is social. There's you post something on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or anywhere, and people give you thumbs ups, people give you hearts, people give you screams and angry emojis. So yeah, it's exciting, but it's also distracting. Secondly, yeah, more advertisement from a pizza company. So yeah, people do know that they violate terms and conditions and guidelines, and it's actually easy to get apps banned because of that, or messaging apps for that matter. Hey, you got a loot box, even though it's not a game, it's a messaging app. Sure. But yeah, they're prevalent in across all of the industries pretty much. So I mentioned social, I mentioned travel, I mentioned games, tourism. Like people try to get you to tell you, hey, we are running out of rooms in this hotel that you looked at a couple of weeks ago. So maybe you should go and buy. There is ride sharing. Every industry is using and unfortunately also abusing push notification technologies for their gain. But yeah, this talk is not a rant. This talk is actually, I'll just mention a couple of things that annoy me personally. And what this talk is about is it does include some annoyances, as you've seen, like this one, but it's also aimed to get you to consider sending fewer of this and more of this. Now, this is the same app, EasyJet. I think you might all be familiar with it. It's a low-cost European airline, and sometimes they send crappy marketing notifications. Hey, there is a sale now on. And sometimes they sell something like this. You're at the gate, you're waiting at the airport, and you get informed, hey, your gate is 22B. Please proceed there now. Or they even show you your boarding pass in a notification, so it's easily accessible, so that there is a lot less hassle for you because they know you're in this particular space and time waiting for this event to happen, so they know a lot of your context and they can serve you relevant things based on that. So yeah, less that, more that. Let's start. So we'll look at the technology first. What enables us to make pushes, to make notifications, what they are, and what are some of the principles behind them. So yeah, I'm talking push notifications, but there are several different terms behind it. So notifications are the things that you actually display on the screen, and pushes start from a remote server when the app is or isn't available. They can still be delivered, and they can actually result in a notification, which is a push notification, or they can not. They can be silent. You can also show notifications like this. This isn't coming from a push. This is from Pocket Casts, which is a podcast app, and it helps me control the playback on a podcast that I'm looking at. There is music, there is alarms. You don't need internet connection. You don't need to send something to the user if you know that something is playing on them and it might be useful. I'm not talking about those. I'm also not talking about the hidden notifications. So earlier this year, there was a story about the app Telegram, the messaging app Telegram, which was being banned or blocked in Russia. And they were overcoming this blockade. Basically, they were banning whole ranges of IP addresses that belong to Amazon, I believe, AWS, in order to block Telegram from using the service. And they were sending new ranges of IP addresses using silent push notifications or silent pushes, which was really cool. Another common use case is you can have a news app, and in the morning you know that someone's gonna be looking at your app and they might be interested in your news that you have to serve them, and you can send some stuff over. Hey, preload these 10 stories. The user might be interested in it. And yeah, the technologies behind them. We started off with GCM on Android, which is now more or less dead, APNS on iOS, FCM on Android and iOS, and there is a bunch of others. But in the West, usually APNS and FCM are like the biggest ones. In China, they have different notification delivery systems. Essentially, they're the things that the networks, the infrastructure that more or less every push goes through when you send it from a server. So I'm talking about this. People like them. I work in marketing, so yeah, we do like them. And yeah, more or less for the Western markets, they're pretty much the only way to communicate with apps that are closed. The way it works is there are some servers somewhere in the cloud, and there are some devices that communicate with those servers, and you trigger some events on your end, and things happen, and you receive them. Basically, I'm not going into the tech because this is more of a UX kind of a talk. So yeah, we've mentioned technology, but what about the human side of it? So notifications are interruptions. And the whole point behind them is to give people random bits of engagement, random rewards at random intervals that get people to use your app. because human brains are wired so that we like rewards. We like little bits of candy to lure us into a giant box, basically. And we want to know things, and then we get distracted. So there is a couple of people, like 3 or 4 I see, using phones right now. So, yep. Yeah, they are aimed to distract us, which is not good if you're a user, but it's good if you're a filthy marketeer. Because the reality is, these marketing things, they work. You send someone telling, hey, there is a sale now on, and these things actually push the needle. People open apps more, people make more purchases after they've opened the apps more, and your numbers improve, and you get a nice Christmas bonus. So if you want to do this in the future, just do it again. Send more pushes. And we call it retention. I used to work in retail technology, and yeah, that was kind of the words that we were throwing around in that time. So it's not so far from there. And then when there's too much retention, you get a notification telling that you have too many notifications to show. But yeah, the reality is, I've looked at some stats on the internet. They have to be true, obviously. Even if there's fewer than 10 in a week from a single app, people will disable them. People will uninstall the apps. People will churn. Which, as a developer, that's not your objective, is it? We want engagement. We want people to be using the apps. We want to send useful things. So let's send them actually relevant things. This is from a door motion sensor. It's really good when you're a couple of thousand kilometers away and you get notifications every 15 minutes saying, "Hey, someone's at your door." Great. And yeah, speaking of psychology, it can cause anxiety, it can cause distress, and it can cause you to lose a channel. Combine that with all of that addiction thing. It's not only the users that are getting addicted, it's also the people sending them that are getting addicted to their success. And in the end, when there's too much of them, people aren't very comfortable with them, this guy gets fired. So yeah, what one day gave him a bonus, next day can get him fired. So yeah, let's see how we can counter that, how we can make them suck less and rock more, and go from here to here. So first, ask yourself, should you create a notification? Or should this be an email? Or something else? Or it's not really relevant and you shouldn't really tell the user this? Luckily, our friends at Slack came up with this handy guide. Just follow this and all will be revealed. This is an actual diagram from Slack. This was, I think it's like around 2 years old. It was after Threads were released, so that was January 17, so around 2 years. And yeah, this is their decision diagram that either starts with a simple question, should we send a notification, and then goes through all the user preferences, all the conditions that we know that user is in, and finally results in a simple yes or no. And Slack can teach us that, because they get two things really well. First thing is personalization. You have multiple devices where you're accessing Slack. You have your phone, you have your computer, you may have your tablet. Maybe you want notification on your desktop, but not on your phone. Maybe you don't want them on your tablet. Maybe you want them in particular channels. Maybe if you're on call, you're monitoring one particular channel that you're really interested in, and all the others are irrelevant. You can set all of these in the app, and Slack will trust you and kind of follow your preferences, which is really cool. And the other thing it gets right is the context. Modern teams, they're increasingly remote. We're in different time zones, so knowing the context, where the user is, am I traveling? Am I in a completely different time zone from my US colleagues? App can know that. It's quite easy for them to know that because they have all the data, and using that data to decide whether something is relevant is the actual art. And even when they are like, okay, we're gonna send this notification, they decide on the priority of it. So they decide whether it should just show up as a message or it should start ringing all the bells. So in a nutshell, be like Slack. Another one really good example that I've seen yesterday was this app. Maybe some of you might be familiar with this. This is from the settings of a local Oslo app from, what's it called? The Router, yeah. So, yeah, you buy tickets basically for public transport, and you can buy single use tickets or daily tickets or monthly or yearly. And you can set, hey, notify me a day before my weekly expires or an hour before my daily expires. All different settings, and it will just take those into account and notify you when you want it. And that's really cool. So that's the question. Should you send something? Ask the user. They'll tell you. Secondly, make them work. Making them work is quite obvious, but it's also not that easy because apps are getting more and more complex, more and more bigger and bigger. So you may want to put advanced features in them. So deep linking, for instance. Maybe you want to link to one particular item that the user has in a shopping cart, or that if you have an order update, for instance, your item is being delivered, take me to that particular order page. And because we all know that state management is hard, don't make it crash, okay? Really pay attention, test those things, because whatever drives people to your app can easily drive them out of your app if it doesn't work. So yeah, test. Always test. We might hear this more than once today. I mean, we've heard it in the previous talk already, so yeah, more of that. Because, you know, this happened a couple of weeks ago. This is from Jack Dorsey, and if you know, he's the CEO of Twitter. And he tweeted a bunch of push notifications coming from Twitter app that make complete nonsense, and a bunch of iOS users were getting them. The story behind this, I believe they wanted to send silent pushes, but they actually send them as notifications. I think it's for like how many notifications you have in Twitter. So very meta notifications that shouldn't really notify anyone. So yeah, test, but not in production. Okay, so we've covered the technology, we've covered the psychology, we know whether to send something and how to make it work. But let's see how we can make them achieve what we want. So both Apple and Google, they have those interface guidelines. They have guidelines, documents, extensive documents for how things should work, should appear. And but in a nutshell, they just describe notifications as some short, timely bursts of information that are easily accessible. And they come to your app when it is not being used. And I mentioned, yeah, they have a bunch of sites dedicated to this. So this is the APls one, and they explain everything but you don't need to read all of that. It's mostly just prose, but if you're curious about something, then you know it's there to look it up. Hey, maybe this is not what I wanted. My favorite one is actually from Google's material design subsite. It's essentially material design guidelines, and it has a bunch of points like do this, but don't do this. Show if you're showing a messaging app, maybe don't show user that sent you the message in a like a big image, like things that make sense, but really they put it in a very obvious way. So I really like this as a resource for kind of referencing where you want to go. Next up, like they all allow you different styling, they have different APIs for styling notifications, for showing them. And yeah, I mentioned you can do text, you can do a large image, you can do a small image, you can do a lot of text, you can modify the sound, you can modify what's shown on the lock screen. You can group notifications. So maybe if it's a group message, then you just show them in this single group. You can even go as far as add custom actions or set priorities, so that if something is something is quite important, let it ring. If something is not important, don't let it ring, basically. And yeah, knowing all this, there is a couple more things I want to mention here. First up, you have the lock screen. If your app is targeting Android, this is how much space you have in that lock screen notification. This is a Nexus 5. It has 37 characters. Allowed space to write something. Everything above that is just gonna kind of ellipsize, and it's not gonna be visible. So keep it to the point. iOS has a bit more, has 100 to 200, depending on which device we're talking about. I guess watches, they might be different again. In the previous talk, they mentioned watches. So pay attention to what you're sending to and how it's going to render on those devices. And yeah, Android is it's a bit more Wild Westy. So keep in mind there is a lot of different devices out there. Second, on Android especially, they've introduced channels. Notifications have come in different channels, and if you want to send something, they need to be implemented there. So what it allows us is you can tell whether notifications come into like a critical category, or maybe like this is a chat, this is a group chat, this is a email that was sent directly to me, maybe this is something really urgent reminder that I've set, or maybe it's something that is just a FYI kind of thing. And based on those channels, you can fine-tune the preferences. The user can actually fine-tune the preferences. So you can disable sound, you can disable notifications altogether without actually blocking all of that. But if you don't implement that, if all of your notifications fall in the same category, fall in the same channel, then the user can either just disable all of them or keep them all enabled. So if you annoy them, they're going to disable all of them. So yeah, priority from a nice to know FYI kind of thing to, oh shit, something is on fire. Yeah, again, you just can't disable everything. Don't abuse things like that. If something is important, let it be important. If it's not, just keep it quiet. And yeah, we have lock screens. My phone is often on the table, and I might receive some work emails on it. And if something is critical, I don't want to see that email shown on the lock screen, because anyone can glance at it. So things like that. Is something private, or is something more relevant, if more valuable, if it's always visible? Because some things like this, for instance, this is a payment app, a bank application, or no, actually, yeah, it's a bank in the UK that sends you a notification every time you make a payment, and that I want to know. Like, because if someone's stolen my app, if someone's compromised my account, I want to know about it now. And it's not, if it's not, then it's not telling me anything completely secret that I shouldn't really know. So yeah, there is a distinction you can make on the lock screen when and how to show what. Lastly, I want to do a point into custom layouts, because you can modify them just beyond whatever I've told you so far. You can actually implement your own custom UIs. In iOS, this is through extensions. In Android, this is a bit more simpler, I believe. But yeah, you can have notifications that change, that are actually updating themselves, and in some cases this is really relevant. So the example I have here is from Guardian Mobile Lab, and they made this exploration kind of thing where they covered elections and covered games, and based on what it was, they would update it and render things. Who's the winner, who's leading, all of that. And it was all done through custom UIs in a notification. The one above is like, this is how you'd see it otherwise, and this is how you'd see it if you expanded it. So it's all really cool. And I mentioned the QR codes or boarding passes. You can show that in custom notifications easily. Or yeah, Eventbrite has QR codes. So yeah, here's another thing that both Apple and Google have in common. And that thing is well-being. It's a thing now. Google announced a bunch of new features in I/O this year, and Apple did so too. And basically, they introduced features that take the control back to the user off their phone, and you can fine-tune the do not disturb modes. You can fine-tune when you want to receive something, and you can actually block a bunch of that very easily. You can basically, what this means, they went from allowing the developers to send everything to giving control back to the users, to you, the people. And the reason this happened, they had to do it, is app developers have been abusing notifications a lot, and yeah, let's make them stop. They had to do this. So yeah, because everyone needs some calm in their lives. So yeah, don't fight your users, and don't fight their well-being. We're here to help our users, help them achieve their well-being. My name is Zan, and this was Push Notifications That Don't Suck. Thank you.